When a black female pilot is ready for her next flight, a racist passenger disturbs her day. The airport was bustling with its usual energy, passengers dragging suitcases, checking tickets, and making last-minute calls before boarding. Flight announcements echoed over the intercom, and the smell of coffee filled the air. It was a typical busy afternoon at the gate, where travelers stood in line, ready to board their flight to a new destination. Among them was Jenna, a well-dressed middle-aged woman who seemed impatient, tapping her foot and constantly glancing at her watch. "This is ridiculous," she muttered loudly to no one in particular, her irritation clear. "I've got important things to do, and we're still waiting." The delay seemed minor to some, but Jenna had no patience for any hiccup in her carefully timed schedule. She was used to efficiency, and waiting in line was not part of her plan. Every few seconds she sighed loudly, as if hoping someone would notice her frustration and resolve the issue just for her. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her emails, and muttered under her breath. Passengers around her were too focused on their own plans to pay much attention, but her irritation was palpable. Meanwhile, Grace, a black female pilot, was preparing for the flight. She walked confidently through the terminal, her crisp uniform and neat hair reflecting her professionalism. Grace had worked hard to reach this point in her career, overcoming many challenges along the way. Her focus was on getting to the cockpit to begin her pre-flight checks, knowing that a slight delay was all part of the job. She remained calm, aware that a cool head was essential for her responsibilities. As she walked past the passengers, a few people smiled at her, acknowledging her as part of the crew. She returned their smiles, feeling the familiar warmth of recognition. However, when Jenna saw Grace in her pilot's uniform, she froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Wait a minute," Jenna said, her voice sharp and loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Are you the pilot?" Grace stopped and turned toward Jenna, maintaining a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am," she replied calmly. "I'm the captain for this flight. We'll be boarding soon." Jenna's expression soured. "No, this can't be right. You? A pilot?" she stammered, shaking her head. "I don't feel comfortable with you flying this plane. How can they let this happen?" Her voice grew louder, drawing attention from other passengers. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others looked curious, unsure of what Jenna meant. Grace felt a pang of hurt at the woman's words, but she kept her composure. This wasn't the first time she had faced such prejudice. "Ma'am," Grace said, her voice steady, "I assure you, I'm fully qualified to fly this plane. Safety is my top priority." Jenna crossed her arms, glaring at her. "I don't care about your qualifications," she snapped. "I paid for this ticket, and I have a right to feel safe. And frankly, I don't feel safe with you in that cockpit." The atmosphere grew tense as passengers started paying closer attention to the confrontation. Some people pulled out their phones, recording, while others watched in silence, their expressions a mix of discomfort and curiosity. A few murmured quietly to their neighbors, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. A flight attendant named Sarah hurried over, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Ma'am, please calm down," she said to Jenna, keeping her voice even. "Captain Grace is one of our best pilots, and we're here to ensure you have a safe and comfortable flight." But Jenna wasn't backing down. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking," she insisted, her voice rising again. "This isn't right. I don't trust her." Grace could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, but she wouldn't let Jenna's words shake her. She had earned her place in that cockpit, and she wasn't about to let someone's narrow-mindedness change that. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns," Grace said, her voice calm. "But please know that I am more than capable of flying this plane. I've been trained extensively and have handled all kinds of situations. My qualifications and experience speak for themselves." Before Jenna could respond, an older man seated nearby stood up. "Excuse me, miss," he said, addressing Jenna, "but I've flown on many planes in my lifetime, and I can tell you that a pilot's ability has nothing to do with how they look. I trust this captain to get us where we need to go." His words broke the tension for a moment, and a few passengers nodded or murmured in agreement. Jenna looked around, her confidence faltering as she realized she was losing the support she thought she had. Her authority was being questioned, and she didn't like it. Grace offered the man a grateful smile, appreciating his unexpected support. Despite the tension in the air, she wasn't going to let this encounter ruin her focus. She had a plane to fly, and she intended to do her job well. The training she'd gone through hadn't prepared her for dealing with public confrontations like this, but she had learned long ago how to maintain her composure in the face of ignorance. The gate area remained charged with emotion. Anger, curiosity, and sympathy all swirling together. Phones continued to record, and whispers spread among the crowd. Jenna, still standing her ground, looked determined to make her point. "I'm not trying to cause a scene," Jenna said, her voice straining with frustration, "but we deserve the best and most experienced pilot for this flight, and I don't believe that's her." She gestured toward Grace dismissively, as if pointing out the obvious. Grace stood tall, her posture steady despite the hurtful remarks. She knew this wasn't about her skills, but about who she was, and she wasn't going to let that define her. "I assure you, ma'am," Grace said firmly, "I am fully qualified and experienced. My job is to get us all safely to our destination. Making assumptions about me based on how I look isn't fair, and it certainly doesn't reflect the reality of who I am as a pilot." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some passengers began to nod and even voice their support quietly. Jenna, however, remained defiant. "This isn't about fairness," she said sharply. "It's about safety, and I don't feel safe." Sarah, the flight attendant, stepped forward again. "Ma'am, please understand that safety is always our priority. Captain Grace has years of experience, and you have nothing to worry about." But Jenna crossed her arms tighter. "I'm not getting on this plane if she's flying it," she declared loudly, as if expecting others to follow her lead. But instead of support, she was met with silence. Passengers now looked at her with disapproval. Grace felt a surge of determination. She had faced prejudice before, but never so publicly. This time, she wouldn't let it bring her down. She had worked too hard for that. Before Grace could respond, a young woman who had been quietly observing the situation stepped forward. "I think you're wrong," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I've flown with Captain Grace before, and she's an incredible pilot. I trust her." Jenna blinked, clearly taken aback. The crowd began murmuring again, and this time, the tone was supportive of Grace. A few people even clapped softly, while others nodded in agreement. As the murmur of support grew louder, Jenna's frustration became more evident. Her face flushed red with embarrassment, but she wasn't ready to give in just yet. Her gaze swept the room, looking for a familiar face, someone who might stand with her. But instead of finding support, she was met with more disapproving stares. The power she thought she had over the situation was quickly slipping away. And then, just as things seemed to calm down, another voice came from the back of the crowd. An elderly man stood up, walking toward Grace. "I've been flying for decades," he said calmly, "and I can tell you that a pilot's skill is what matters, not their appearance. I trust this captain with my life." Jenna's face reddened further, and she looked down, realizing she was losing ground. Grace stood taller, bolstered by the support around her. The passengers who had been mere observers moments ago were now actively taking sides, and most of them were backing Grace. By the time the boarding call was made, Jenna remained silent, retreating into the crowd. The passengers who had witnessed the confrontation filed onto the plane, many of them offering Grace words of encouragement as they passed by. As Grace settled into the cockpit, she felt a deep sense of pride. She had proven once again that she belonged right where she was. No amount of prejudice could change that. And as the plane took off into the sky, Grace smiled, knowing that nothing would stop her from soaring. How would you respond if you witnessed a similar situation at an airport or any other public space? What would you do? I hope this story touched your soul. If it did, please subscribe. Your support means everything to me, and it helps me keep sharing these wonderful stories with you.